Welcome to the A World of Neighbours Summit. I'm Reverend Dr. Sivin Kit, the Program Executive for Public Theology and Interreligious Relations with the Lutheran World Federation. Our topic for today is keeping our humanity, and there's a question. Is there a shrinking space, inverted commas, for the religious perspective in society? Now, I'd like to just welcome all of you to this session. Now, some of you might be interested to also pose questions to our panelists later. You can use the Q&A function, so that will be easier for us to know who's asking the question, and it's a bit more private, then we can address it accordingly. Now, today I have three very distinguished speakers. I will just introduce them briefly to you. And they are, well, the first is Claudel Appleman. Now, he's the Executive Director of the Latin American Jewish Congress, a regional branch of the World Jewish Congress, and Commissioner for the Interreligious Dialogue and representative to the Holy See of the World Jewish Congress. Now, one thing I noticed when I was getting to know him online was that he had this interesting relationship with Pope Francis, and perhaps that might come out afterwards in the way he's sharing about what interfaith relation means, and especially what does a shrinking space mean for a religious perspective. The other speaker we have is Dr. Emin Poljarevic. He's the Associate Professor of Sociology of Religion and Senior Lecturer in Islamic Theology and Philosophy at the Faculty of Theology, Uppsala, University, Sweden. Now, he has written quite a number of very important books, but his latest publication is on the theology of violence. It's titled Theology of Violence-Oriented Takfirism as a Political Theory, New Islamic Movements and Concepts of Citizenship. But also he has written a bit about Malcolm X, so that actually drew my attention even more to want to hear about him. Now, of course, our host for today is Archbishop Antje, the Archbishop of the Church of Sweden. And I guess she's very familiar to all of us. Now, her international engagements include being the Nordic Vice President of the Lutheran World Federation and Co-President of Religions for Peace. And very important for our purposes, 2018, she took the initiative to start the program of Interreligious Praxis for Peace, A World of Neighbours. And this is the conversation that we're all part of. So thank you very much, all of you. You're still introducing yourself, and we get to know you and who is in the session today. And I'd like to just start off by just inviting our speakers to just share a little bit, when you look at this topic, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? And what comes to your mind when you look at this topic today? What's the first thing? And perhaps we can start with our guest, Claudio, all the way from Brazil.
No, all the way from Buenos Aires, who is even southern and farthest from Switzerland. But I am. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. It is a real pleasure to share with you this opportunity. And as we were speaking, the opportunity also to be together, despite we are not together. We are spread in the world, but it's something that I believe will be part of the heritage of these 2 years of COVID, and the opportunity to create our neighbors, to be neighbors despite we don't live exactly each next to other. But I think this is the nicest sense of this meaning. I was seeing the program, participating in these in some activities, and it is amazing what you are doing, and thank you for the invitation for joining. As you said, I am based in Buenos Aires. I am native speaker of Spanish, and I'm trying to do my best in English. But what is my first reaction when I believe that we see the war, what is happening, how we are suffering sometimes, and how we were impacted because COVID. We saw that in the last 2 years we were not so different. in terms of the action of COVID. The virus didn't distinguish between country, didn't distinguish about nationality, face, and not if we are poor or if we are rich, if we are speakers in English or in Arabic or in Swedish. It was a pandemic that reminds us about our condition of human being, of persons. And I think that is the message that we could be, because as faith leaders, we are more familiarized and usually we speak about it. And what is my first approach when I see this topic and when I speak about it, this is to remind us that despite our difference, we are all brothers and sisters. We are all of us are part of the same family. And this is my first reaction to your question after these 2 years of COVID. And thank you for the COVID that gave me the opportunity to join us, you, from Buenos Aires.
Indeed, my apologies. It's Argentina in a football setting. I have to be very careful.
No, could be very dangerous, this mistake.
Indeed. Thank you for your graciousness. And Emin, tell us, what do you feel? What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you look at a topic?
Well, thank you,
yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. And you see this last comment, the issue about the world of neighbors. So Argentina and Brazil, and it could be very, very dangerous if you mistaken these two. But thank you so much. I'm not very used to attending such these type of events. As an academic, it's always about the theory and methodology and empirical studies about certain topic and a certain area of expertise of the people who are attending, right? But this is more of a relaxed venue where I think the issue of world of neighbors, it's really what binds together these Abrahamic traditions, right? And they have always been neighbors in one way or the other, and the rest of the humanity, as Claudio rightly pointed out, is really woke up to the sober fact that we are not so very different, right? Despite the fact that we are pretending that we are. So I think that the entire initiative and the purpose of the meeting is really to get to know each other, because neighbors in many ways are those who are next to each other, trying to find out how similar or different they are from the closest people to them, right? So I think that's an excellent way of bridging the gap and trying to express, also to find out the similarities in both difficulties, how people of faith can experience facing various structures of discrimination and racism and so on and so forth. So this is a very welcome event in these times of which are very challenging for both people of faith and those who are secular, if you wish. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
That's great. And Archbishop Jacqueline, you are the initiator of the World of Neighbours, and I have been in a conversation with colleagues, and we feel that the word neighbor is so much more close to our hearts than the word stranger. And I guess when you look at this topic, which is initiated very much from your heart, we would love to hear maybe your revisit of this topic again.
Yeah, I think it's still a great vision. And it's wonderful seeing that it brings people together. Also, as you introduce yourselves in the chat, it's just amazing to see how the word and the message has spread about building a world of neighbors and discovering the world of neighbors that is out there. And I'm also very happy for this connection between faith leaders and the academy. Telling Emin, we need more of academia in this that wants to step up and supply knowledge. Because my answer to this, is there shrinking space or not, is maybe a typical Lutheran answer. It's both and. On the one hand, we have so many forces that try to push out these perspectives to the margins. On the other hand, we have such an enormous need for existential reflection, for a credible hope, for all these questions of meaning and so on, that really call for responses that are nourished by faith traditions. So yes and no would be the answer.
Thank you, Archbishop. And indeed, that's a yes and no also points to the complexities that we live in, the society that we live in, isn't it? And I'm curious, especially, maybe I can start off with Claudio again, and then of course we can interact with each other more naturally after this. You know, especially in recent times, some have said that it is not so much of a rise of anti-Semitism, but maybe a rise of anti-Jewish or anti-Jewish rhetoric. And I'm just wondering whether you feel that, and especially in the light of this topic, do you find that it is difficult to bring this out in this current climate?
Yes, I think first of all, we are living in a world where the hate is increasing, unfortunately. And between the hate speech that we usually can feel, and in the last years, through also the social media, that is an amazing way to put people in contact with others, unfortunately also is used for spreading hate. And this, we are feeling that there is actually really an increasement of attacks against Jews and also a rhetoric against Jews, both of them together. And in UK was released the report of the last year about the incidents against the Jewish community, and it was the maximum number in the history. It was a peak number. Also, we can see the same phenomena in France, in Germany, where we are really feeling that the hate is being, in some people, stronger than love. And this is the perspective I think we have to remind, that when we speak about neighbors, we have to understand that to live together, we don't need to be equals. We have to respect our differences. And this is the big goal. And I think to respect difference between people is to do not attack them, is to overcome the prejudice, is to do not be related to the other because our beliefs and not believings, the stereotypes, and not the real who the real person is who is living next to us. And this is, I think, the big challenge. And this is the message of, I think, of the tradition, the Jewish tradition, to don't believe about the stereotypes and never about hate. And for those that speak about hate and even about violence, I want to say that those are not from my community. It means it is not on behalf of my Jewish tradition. It is not on behalf of the rabbinical tradition. And the same, I think, when we are victims of those attacks, I think we have to confront the hate speech altogether.
I mean, usually people immediately turn to Muslims and say, do you feel that there's Islamophobia and irrational fear about Muslims, especially in the case of migration? And I wonder, what are your thoughts as you listen to Claudio as well?
Right, but look, I can only say that a lot of that Claudio has said is really mirrored for the Muslim and Muslim presence in Europe. Is very much, and there's this kind of a discourse which kind of compares the Jewish question and Jewish situation 100 years ago in Europe somehow being similar to what some Muslims are experiencing today, right? So Islamophobia is defined usually, there are many definitions, but usually is defined as a rooted in racism, or it's a type of racism that really targets these expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness, right? So as such, people can sometimes criticize, but look, Muslims are not a race, and how can this be a racism, and so on and so forth. But we see, as Claudio has pointed out, the hatred towards not only Muslims per se, but also people who are perceived to be Muslims. They're not maybe Muslims, right? But they are experiencing the hate, the attacks, both violence and verbal attacks and abuse in many of our European societies. And Sweden is not an exception to this, right? We have last year we had a quite important report from organization which registers the crimes, just both petty crimes and also larger types of crimes or more violent types of crimes in Sweden, which really raised the question about how this individual expression of Islamophobia in society is very prevalent, it's on the rise, so to say. It's very similar to what Claudio has said about the anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish racism against Jewishness or Jewish objects of worship and so on and so forth. And very similar in terms of how this type of anti-Muslim racism is expressed in Sweden and elsewhere in Europe, really. So that could be only on one side, this kind of individual expressions of hatred towards Muslims, but also this type of racism has also become more mainstream, starting from the far right and being appropriated with center-right political parties, and even entering the legal aspect of our societies, which targets also Muslims as being a threat, right? So that's the kind of this perception of them being a threat to our nation or our way of life or whatever it might be, right? So there's this kind of it's a process which kind of it's ongoing, and it's going in a totally wrong direction that they would like to see it, right? So that would be kind of a summary of my perception of that.
In some sense, it's as if it's crowding. They prefer their voices. They prefer both of your voices to be silenced or to be privatized, or to not be expressed in public, whether it's religious symbolism or maybe your views on from a Jewish perspective or a Muslim perspective. Now, I know, Archbishop, for you have experienced Twitter storms in your own life, and you have spoken out also from a religious perspective, but there were also pushbacks. And do you feel that there's a shrinking space for religious perspectives in society, and how do you deal with that?
Well, I definitely share what you have said before, that there has been a rise in both anti-Semitic hate speech and hate speech against Muslims, and it's driven a lot by social media, but it also spills over to mainstream media, because what is very prevalent in social media also gets an echo in mainstream media, and it can be that it's copied or that it silences more decent voices, or that it makes certain topics no-go zones, to put it that way. And also, I mean, practically the costs for security for synagogues and mosques, they just increase also, which is a sign how bad this is. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, I think it's very much fueled by the traditional anti-Jewish stereotypes, which were brought to the surface again in connection with the pandemic. And when it comes to anti-Muslim sentiments, they're very much fueled by the Muslims being a threat to Europe in this sense. It's coupled with migration. So what this does, it makes some conversations sort of toxic. And I think that is the problem. There is not a prohibition to talk about religion or anything, but there is this continuous strive to put you into a certain, to pigeonhole you, and to pigeonhole you in a way that you are silenced or that you are irrelevant or that you are the enemy to certain things. So I think a remedy would be, of course, to speak with a common voice. And I see that happening. I mean, if you turn it around, a good thing is that both think Christian communities strengthen their work together. We definitely do that in the Christian Council of Sweden, but also that interfaith dialogue becomes more, in a sense, more natural, because we recognize things that are done to us, that are done to our traditions, and that is, in a sense, a good thing.
I think.
Go ahead, Claudio.
If you allow me, I think that according to the Jewish tradition, the man should wear a covering, a hat, a small hat. In Hebrew we said kippah, which is a part of the religion. And and it is mainly worn by the Orthodox movement, the bigger movement of rabbis and tradition in Europe. And when a rabbi say to his congregation, do not walk in the street with a kippah, it means don't show that you are a Jew. And he's an Orthodox rabbi, that he's violating the Jewish law that say you should walk, you should be all the time with your head covered. It is a real problem in the daily life of the community, where anti-Semitism is not only a perception of the Jewish community, it is something that is happening on the ground. And when the anti-Semitism is affecting the community, because it is affecting my own right to be and to show that I am a Jew, and to wear and to walk in the street as a Jew, it is a real attack against the faith. It is a real attack against the freedom of worship. And when it is limiting the capability of the community to live as it wish, with the members identified as Jewish members, it is a real problem for the developing and trying to project in the future. And I think that is the point of the Jewish community currently in some countries of Europe, where it is really, really increasing the anti-Semitism. But I also want to remark, as Emin and Jacqueline said, that it is not only a Jewish problem, because we have an observatory to monitor what is going on anti-Semitism in the internet. But in parallel to our anti-Semitism project, we are monitoring also Islamophobia, because we believe, and this is part of our perspective, we cannot find anti-Semitism if we are not fighting also any kind of expression of violence or Islamophobia. And what is the key point? That if we want to live as Jews or as Christians or as Muslims, we should take care not only about our community, but also of our neighbors' community. This is building neighborhood, because it is something that we should to build. And what is my last point, Sibin, before I am extending too much, that if we want to confront the hate, we should do together. And if I say an Islamophobic attack, I as a Jew and Jacqueline as Christian should be the first one to respond to an Islamophobia attack. And the same thing, that if there is an attack against Christians, the freedom of the Christians, I as Jew and Emin as Muslim should be the first responders. And this is to build neighborhood.
In some sense, it feels like it's like we need to occupy the space together, right? So this so-called shrinking space, we need to also expand our hearts as well as our space with our neighbors. I wonder whether Archbishop or Emin, both of you have anything to add to this?
just that these things, I see these things happen, and when they do happen, they are very beautiful and very powerful. So actually standing on the ground together and with your bodies protesting against hateful speech, that is actually very powerful. And of course, if you do it together, it reduces the anxiety. Because of course this induces levels of anxiety in all of us. And from a Christian perspective, one of the most powerful weapons that is used in our country is to just privatize faith, saying it's private, nothing but private. It should not have anything to do in the public space. The public space should be neutral, because only if it's neutral, it's free. Because as soon as we have the religious traditions there, they're going to fight each other, and that's bad for democracy. So by reversing that and seeing, well, actually we stand together and we can, with our bodies, show that we can live diversity, we can live neighborhood. And for me, the definition of a good neighbor is not necessarily, and I think Claudio was saying something similar, it's not that we need to be best buddies all the time, but it's a basic level of trust. Like when I sit at my kitchen table and there's a fire in my attic and I don't see it, but my neighbor sees it from their garden, or I trust that the neighbor will tell me and call the fire brigade, not because the neighbor is anxious that their house will be on fire, but because the neighbor thinks we must save these people. That's, to me, that's the baseline of being neighbors.
That's right. And that's the way we keep our humanity, because life is actually more precious than our own, preferences and so on. Emin, what do you feel as you listen to both Claudia and Archbishop Antje sharing right now?
Well, you see, I can only second what has been said with a comment that our secular state orders and our secular societies, especially in Scandinavia and Sweden, as Antje was saying, there is very little space for a religious discourse in the public space. Okay, so there is a taboo to speak about religion, or in religious terms about important issues such as human rights or any type of that nature, right? So what Claudio and Antje are saying is really the shrinking space is not only due to the hatred or to the insecurities in the world, but it's also due to the secularism as a state ideology, right? So, which dominates the public space. And anything that resembles religion in the public space will also be threatening to the secularism as an ideological project. So for that reason, I totally agree that people of faith and civil society organizations need to really engage in a dialogue and in a cooperation in order to promote questions which are relevant to all of these. So neighbors in that sense would not be that they are totally the same, but they have similar types of interest where religion can play a positive role and can be seen as a resource to various problems that society at large faces, not only religious communities, but resource for the entire population of a place or a state or region, right? So, and that demands, I think, civil society structures which are in place in order to, so Church of Sweden since 2000 is seen as a civil society actor, right? Or a religious community on equal basis as other communities in Sweden, right? But Church of Sweden is traditionally one of the pillars of Swedish society, bearing in all of these centuries that have passed. So it's not really on an equal basis, but Church of Sweden is such a positive actor that it tries to engage in minority religious communities, such as many Muslim communities. So I think Muslim communities, as far as when I speak to them, they see Church of Sweden as a true partner in promoting important questions. And that's one positive example I can give from the Swedish experience.
That's very good. but if I may, it also creates a dilemma, what you described about the dynamics of secularism. It creates a damn if you do, damn if you don't situation.
Right.
Because if you use theological language in the public space, there, we don't understand that. It's not relevant theological language. And if you put the theology in a more sort of secular language, that you don't say, well, we care about children because Jesus said this and this and this. You see, we care about the rights of the children. Then you say, you're political. You are not Christian, you're political. So that situation can be quite difficult to handle. And I think it needs good allies.
Right. And I would just add a little bit before we go on, to say that human beings or citizens, regardless of faith, orientation, or whatnot, are not political or should not be political because of a certain faith, orientation, or whatnot, is just ridiculous. Because as a human being or a person of faith, or be it Jew or Muslim or Christian, you enter a public space as a human being with all that baggage, and you can be political. But that's not, so to say, it's not allowed to speak in theological terms. And that's why Jewish and Muslim and Christian representatives are trying to adjust entirely their discourse to the secular one, so people in the public space can take them seriously. And that's unequal distribution of power, if you wish, for good or for worse. It depends on which side you stand, so to say.
So let's go to the other side, all over there on the other side of the ocean. Claudio, do you have anything to add to this? Before, I want to pick up some questions that people have raised. And then if you have any questions, do put it in there. Yeah, go ahead.
I will be very short. I think we have two challenges in parallel. The first one is what we're focusing. We're overlapping both of them, and I think just in order to help to understand, it's better to split between both of them. The first one is the interfaith dialogue. It's creating a coalition of people that believes that according to their own tradition, I as a Jew, and each one as he identifies, that we can do a lot of things in order to improve the state of the world altogether. This is the first approach, interfaith dialogue. But I think we have another one in parallel, which is the dialogue of the believers with those that don't believe. And I think this is also a big challenge. And I think it's part of the answer about the secularism in some societies, mostly as you define in Europe. And I think this is also a challenge that I am participating in a lot of interfaith meetings in every region of the world, in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, Middle East, in Far Asia. But when we are focusing only the dialogue between the religions. But we have to open another in parallel, which is believers and people that don't believe, and to share and to try to overcome this prejudice that religion in the public life of the society, in the public space, is not allowed. And I think both together we are in parallel. But again, for doing the second one, it's easier, much easier to tackle all together in terms of the faith leaders.
Thank you so much. I have a question that was posed, and I'll leave it to whoever wants to answer this question first. I'd like to invite the participants, if you like to pose a question to any of the speakers or all of them, you can use the Q&A function. And when you do that, it's easier for me to follow and I can raise that question. So here's one question from an anonymous attendee. In South Africa, when Desmond Tutu was critical toward the ANC, the government, he was told by the President Zuma that he should stick to the politics of heaven. And he, the president, would look after the politics on earth. So the question is, do you, any of you, get comments like that when you speak out against injustice or racism? And perhaps you can elaborate a bit more as you respond to this question. So I'll probably give it to Archbishop first. I'm sure you're one of those who probably get that kind of comment a lot.
Well, I've got it. And I remember an episode when I was invited to the summit of the World Economic Forum. and there were some prominent politicians from Sweden who saw me there and were very surprised, and they said, "Aren't you the one who is in charge of the vertical relationship?"
Right.
And we are the horizontal. And then it was just maybe it was the Holy Spirit. I lifted up this cross, the Archbishop cross, and said, "Look, it is when the vertical and the horizontal meet that things happen." And you have all these rays that's what it's all about. And that's basically what one of the most prominent verses in the Bible, in the New Testament, says, John 3:16. So God loved the world that God gave Son in order to the world to be saved, not some Christians or some faithful or something. No, the world to be saved. So it's about God's love for the world. And who are we to stand in the way for God's love and not being channels for God's love to reach out in the world?
Indeed, your slogan, the phrase that you use for yourself is "God is greater," isn't it, Archbishop? That is a very important theme for you, and that probably is something that many others could resonate, our Muslim friends, and also, of course, our Jewish neighbors too. How about you, Claudio? Did you get any comments like this, that you should just stay with the heavenly stuff and leave the earthly ones to politicians to handle it?
I think I prefer to put in a different perspective and to say we are different, and we also have different roles in the society, which is clear and accepted. So the question is not where I decided to play as a mover in the society. So the real question is which are my values, and the question of values, and which are my parameters of etica and moral. This is the question, and not if I am a religious or a politician, because I don't believe that it is itself a contradiction. The contradiction is when the values that we present of faith leaders are absolutely different than others. But if we share our principle, our guidelines of the life, and we agree in the what are the bases of the society we want to build, I don't see a contradiction. So I prefer to speak which are our values, which are the values that each one decides to take to be active part of the society.
Thank you. Emin, how about you?
Well,
maybe, I mean, people think that you should just stay in the academia, don't come out from the university, right? Probably that's another way of limiting your thoughts. Is that the case for you?
100%. That's the case, exactly, right? So if I'm in academia, I should shut up about the questions of faith in public space or in politics, or I would be labeled as an Islamist or threat to the order or whatnot. So what Claudio is saying here, and what Antje is saying, is really extremely important, because the merit of a person's ethical and moral standing is really what should be judged, right? And that's the kind of the ideal type. And when Antje is saying that the nexus between the horizontal and vertical relationship is something which I think the Muslim community in Sweden and elsewhere in Europe, that's what they are trying to navigate, right? But then we go back to this issue, which is very real. It's not only the ideal, but it's very real issue of the Islamophobia, where Muslims in Europe are not really allowed to make these statements or make these contributions based on their faith values and their tradition in public, because it's immediately delegitimized as a threat to the public order. So we don't even get to this first level in order to kind of engage in a public debate, because that's not okay. But that's why Claudio's suggestion in this interfaith dialogue can enable also the Muslim civil society organizations and faith communities, which are perhaps legitimized by cooperation. You see what I'm saying? So through that would be this next level in order to engage those promoters of ideology of secularism, which of course of historical reasons and other reasons is what's dominating this part of the world, right? So there's a lot work to be done in that perspective, which, and as you see, Seven, it's extremely complex. So there are so many different layers to it, right?
Indeed, I guess it's about the common ground, about sharing common concerns and bringing our values into this discussion. And I guess it's trying to find some common good that we can all pursue together, right? There's an interesting question here by Jean Duff, and it says that to Claudio's excellent point about opening dialogue between faith and secular actors in the avenue towards strengthening our shared humanity. Can any of the panelists give some examples of such a dialogue? I mean, we have heard about how there's solidarity between Jewish, Muslim, and Christians in different moments. Would anyone have any example to share that includes maybe an atheist voice or an agnostic or a humanist in this conversation? So we broaden the understanding of interfaith engagement. Archbishop, I can see you move, ready to say something.
Well, I remember quite many years ago now when I was in Belgium, and people told me, oh, when we have interfaith dialogue, we always invite the secularists, the secular humanists, to be part of the panel. That's sort of a normal. And also remember that the Vatican some years ago had an initiative of actually fostering this cultural dialogue with non-believers. So, and I think it was an initiative that went on for a couple of years, but I don't know what became out of it. I myself have been engaged for many years in the dialogue between science and theology. And I think that is a very valuable area also to address these questions, because it is, in a sense, it is, on the one hand, it's very academic, but by being so interdisciplinary, it also opens it opens the doors, the gates of the ivory tower, and gives people a chance to get out of it and discuss questions that touch things like, what then is a human being? What does it mean to be part of a shared humanity? So there I see possibilities.
Interesting. I think you were talking about theology or religion and science just now, the interdisciplinariness, that was what you were pointing to, yeah. Archbishop, correct?
Yes.
Now, there was, and maybe this, I'll draw in another question because others can chip into, if you had the opportunity to put forward, and this is from Alan, an agenda for an interfaith dialogue in the public space, and Archbishop mentioned about science and all that, what it means to be human, what would be the top topics in the agenda? So I'll invite you to at least give us two. If you have three, that's a bonus, but minimum give us two. And if you need a discount, okay, one. Maybe you have just one priority. So whoever wants to go first, I think, Claudio, would you like to go first?
Okay, I think first I will give two. And I keep my third just in case, okay? I think the first one should be coexistence, creating coexistence. And when I say coexistence, I think it's very related to neighborhood. And in my point of view, we don't should expect for the goodwill to create neighborhood. We should build it. We are the responsible, and mainly because we are leaders, we have a roles, especially roles in our communities and in the society. And the coexistence is the result of the decisions and the gestures of the leaders. This is the first one for me. Creating this pluralism in the society is the result of the work that we should do together. And the second one, it is spreading these messages to all the society, not only to the faith leaders. And I think when we are speaking in a platform of interfaith leaders, it is much easier to have a stronger voice to the society. And you, mainly you, because you are Europeans and you're feeling daily what I read about it and know about it, but you're feeling when you speak about the religion in this public space. But when I want to share with you some different experiences from the other side of the world, my region, my country, where the interfaith committees are very consolidated and very recognized publicly they have a voice for the discussions of the society, not only of our communities. When the society, when the parliament is tackling some very controversial issues, the interface committees, the interface community has a voice and opinion to be part of these discussions. We are living in a country where the church, the Catholic Church, is mostly that 80%, 87, is a big majority. I don't know exactly the numbers, but the huge majority is Catholics, and Jews and Muslims and another expression of Christianism are really minorities. But the real capability of the Catholic Church is not its voice, the voice of itself, is the voice together with the others. And it is approved in the Argentinian society. It is approved in the Brazilian society, where the phenomenon is similar. It's not exactly the same one. And I think, therefore, we have the challenge to work together. We don't have chance. We have to be neighbors in this world. No chance to do it differently. The question is if we can do it in terms of pacific, peaceful coexistence or not. And I think when you are a believer and you're a faith leader, we don't have any chance to do it in terms of coexistence, pacific or peaceful coexistence.
Thank you. Emin, how about you? What would be your top two? We will leave the third maybe afterwards for your closing comments if you have any, but would you have any thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, look, I think Claudio's coexistence suggestion is really brilliant. I was thinking about two at the same time as he was talking. I think the issue of human rights, right? And it's one of the most crucial issues where faith traditions can contribute a lot of resources through which human rights can be both expressed and also molded, right? That's one. And the second one, it's more of an important issue of mental health, right? And faith traditions could also give a lot of resources speaking about mental health as in form of existential health, right? I think that is something which these faith traditions can contribute to the public discourse and lift some extremely important questions and themes which are usually left out, right? So this idea of sedating people who experience mental illness or something of that nature, sedating them with chemicals is something which I think could be remedied by faith traditions really being injected into the public discourse and into conversation, at least, to be a part of this larger conversation. So those are my two suggestions.
Thank you. And Archbishop, how about you? What would be your top topics, two at least, for interfaith dialogue?
Yeah. Well, I believe in putting people around a table and relating to a common question, common problem. Right. And my top problem would be climate. Right. Climate change, because it's a global question. It's global and local at the same time. And it's also an intergenerational question, because it's about the future of our children, grandchildren, and their grandchildren. And I think it also brings together all these other brilliant ideas that you had. It's about coexistence, not only between humans, but it's also about coexistence between humans and the rest of nature. It's about human rights. It's about existential health. So that would be my take.
So that was just one. You can say another one, Archbishop.
I will stick with the one because it leads to so much else.
It covers all. That's the art of a good sermon, is to have one point that can apply to different aspects. Now, this has been such a very interesting conversation between three of you. Now, I was just wondering if you wanted to say something to like faith FPOs or faith communities, and I mean, you talked about the complexity of it all. And Claudio, you also mentioned about how we have to think in different ways and reframing things so that we see our different roles. So what would you say to, on one hand, to faith communities or FBOs to contribute to a more resilient and humane Europe or wherever you are in your context? What would you say to them? What do you think is needed? So this is on one hand, an ask for the faith communities. But at the same time, as you mentioned, we need to talk to the governments as well, those who are policymakers, those who are in power, those who make the regulations. What would you say to them? So you can pick whoever you want to start first. One is towards faith communities. Can they do more? What is needed? Or maybe it needs to be done in a different way. And perhaps after that, you may also want to have an ask for our counterparts in the other side of the aisle, so to speak. So Emin, maybe I can go to you now, since you're the academic. So academics with many books behind you, always ready to pull out a footnote or
right.
something from the bibliography.
That's correct. So without using any major references behind me, I could say that simply faith communities or faith-based organizations should primarily live as they teach, right? I think by an example, they can also show not only to the other side, but to their own members that you can really change your own environment by living as you teach, right? So translating the high ideals of theology into the practical life and applying these moral and ethical ideals in their surrounding, I think that's the basic and first step what they can do. And by showing that they are successful, hopefully, but by being positive and contributing to their environment in a positive way, they can also affect the others. Because when you have and live by a certain moral and ethical ideals, you can also have a much stronger argument. And that's why I research Malcolm X so much. And I'm continuing to write about Malcolm X because he really lived as he taught, right? In a high moral and ethical principles, which he tried to apply and to translate to the general public. So I think Malcolm X, and especially in the last year of his life, can be an example to all of us how theology can be translated into the human rights discourse, contributing to much larger than his own community, but to others as well.
Would there be one more thing you'd like to say about the government or the state, or how they should react? Should be more welcoming?
So government and the state is all about power, right? So what and control. So what one specific faith community can do is really to ally itself with other similar faith communities, so Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and other faith-based communities, in order to kind of put pressure on government in certain questions, certain issues, especially when it comes down to freedom of religion and freedom of expression, or in church or in mosque or synagogue, right? So I think that could be, because you need to have allies in order to have a conversation with the government. Otherwise, you are just controlled by them, right?
So they have to listen, indeed. Claudio, right. How about you?
Very brief remark. I believe that we have to explain to our communities that sitting together with other religions is not avoiding our own identity. I think it is exactly the opposite. Sitting together with those that are different in the beliefs that ours, I think it is the richest experience that help us to strengthen our own identity, recognizing that we are different, but we can sit together. And we don't sit together because we think the same thing and we believe in the same things. In the very beginning, we say we sit together because we are different, but however, we can sit together. And this is the point, that we are not creating a new religion, a new faith, a new kind of syncretism that puts some part of our individual components. We are sitting together to strengthen our own identity, being, and keeping our difference with the others. But despite we're different, and we don't believe the same, and we don't do the same, we sit together to solve our common problems. And I only want to, because I'm looking the watch, I only want to say something about the climate change and something about the fire in the attic that Archbishop Jacqueline present. I think, according to my point of view, we have a common house, and we are neighbors. Very strange, because we are neighbors living in our common house, which is our unique house for us, from our parents and from our kids. As you said, in terms of intergenerational and in terms of diversity. And we should take care about our house, because neighbors living together, there is not anyone outside that can help us to identify that the fire is in the attic. We should know about ourselves that we have facing a lot of problems, and we should to run to take care of the fire. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And Archbishop, I'd like to just give the last word to you for some closing comments as you listen to all this. What would you say to us, and what encouragement do you have for both faith communities and those who are working with faith communities, so that this there's no such thing as a shrinking space, but there's an expansive space, a safe space, and even a brave, I would even add a brave space for us to wrestle with difficult questions that concern us all. So over to you, Archbishop, for some final words.
Thank you, Sivin. Of course, I agree with what you have said before on ways to go. I would start with the don't. Don't marginalize yourself. That's what I would say to faith communities and faith-based organizations. Don't underestimate the space you have got, because I think there's a risk that we do it. Don't underestimate the space you have, and then open the treasure chests that you have in your tradition. I mean, we as Abrahamic faiths, we have such a rich tradition to open up for so many more people. And I think if we do that, we can also be bold in hope, because much of the problems that we face, they have their base in a surplus of fear and in a deficit of hope. And I think people of faith are always called to be agents of hope. And as I said before in one of the seminars, hope is just multifaceted, and hope can harbor the anger about everything that's wrong. And I think that's important to say, but it also has a sense of realism. It can deal constructively with both our strength and our weakness, our vulnerability and our creativity and our mortality. And it has always this idea of choosing the way or path of courage rather than a different path. And I think being bold in hope will actually increase the space that's still there, even though there are powers who are shrinking it. They are there. But don't underestimate, open the treasure chests, and be bold in hope. That would be my message.
Thank you so much for all of your insightful contributions. And I'd like to invite all the participants who have stayed until the end, if you can just share what is one insight that you have gained the most from today's session, please quickly type it in. I'm sure the organizers would appreciate your feedback. And if you want others to know, just put to everyone so that all of us can benefit from what your insights and the speakers too. And in closing with what Archbishop mentioned about hope, if some people ask me, are you a pessimist? Are you an optimist? Then I would say I'm a hopetimist, because I'm neither pessimistic nor just optimistic. It depends on which part of the day. But I guess after wrestling through, analyzing, thinking through, and also dealing with critical questions, we can still have the bold hope that you talked about so well in the closing comments. So let's all be optimists as we wrap up this session. So once again, thank you, Claudio. Thank you, Emin. Thank you, Archbishop, for your contribution. And a good reminder to all of you who are part of this session that we have a closing event on Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Central European time. So do work out when is, if you're from different parts of the world, you might want to work out what is the time difference. But at 3:30 Central European time, CET, will be the closing event, and we'd like to welcome all of you to join us. So before we go, do leave your comments so that we can benefit from each other. And thank you once again for this wonderful session. It has been very enriching, and I've learned a lot from all three of you. And it's amazing that we can do this in this way. And thank you, A World of Neighbours, for a wonderful summit, indeed a climax of a very powerful initiative, I think not just for Europe, but also for other parts of the world, so that we can learn together. So once again, thank you very much. So good evening, or good morning, good afternoon, again, wherever you are. This has indeed been a very enriching experience. So thank you
so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Best.